Hi, I'm Erica Lohm, the Peggy N. Gary Curatorial Associate at the Concord Museum. And today we're in the Lisa H. Foote History Learning Center to talk about a very special object in our collection, Henry David Thoreau's Spyglass. Among the many terms that Henry David Thoreau used to describe himself, natural philosopher might be the most apt. Throughout his life, he dedicated himself to the close observation and recording of the world around him, including and especially the flora and fauna of his native Concord. He took a scientific approach to recording everything from flowers to minerals to the changing of the seasons. Included in his passion was bird watching. He was an amateur ornithologist, a field that was lately developing in the early to mid-19th century, thanks to the work of Alexander Wilson, whose book on birds was highly influential to Thoreau, and he even had this copy with him on his journey so he could identify the correct species. And so as an amateur ornithologist, he was getting pretty close to some of the birds, but there were others that were too far or too exotic or too rare for him to see just with his naked eye. And typically the custom of the day was to study animal specimens in controlled conditions. They would be shot and brought in to study, and that's how you determined characteristics like plumage, species, taxonomies. But there were other things that Thoreau wanted to see that the birds had to be alive for, such as habits and bird songs and patterns of the way they moved and interacted with the world. So he needed something that would enable him to make those observations. And he was pretty skeptical about scientific instruments. He did not want any sort of replacement for the human senses, but I think after a while he was reconciled to the need for a spyglass like this one, which he purchased in 1853 for $8. It's a pretty standard spyglass for the time. It has a diaphragm by the observational lens that would allow him to see further in certain light conditions. And he brought it to a telescope manufacturer, Alvin Clark, to get his opinion, and he deemed it worthy, and so Thoreau took it with him into the wild. And his skepticism was soon erased because shortly after he bought this spyglass, he was able to use it to see a bald eagle, and he was really happy about that. And it became his constant companion in his travels, and he would talk about in his journals, which have over 8,000 mentions of birds in 25 years of journal keeping. And so he is recording everything to do with the birds, not only in Concord, but in his trips to the Cape and throughout Massachusetts and throughout New England, really. And so he used the spyglass, and he said it gave him the eyes of a hawk. And what's neat about Thoreau is that, he is at heart a scientist, and he's very passionate about scientific and empirical methods of observation, but he was also a poet. And when you read his works and his descriptions of birds, you're sort of getting the best of both worlds. For instance, the same year he bought this spyglass in 1853, he would write about the wood thrush that is the only bird whose note affects me like music. It transforms every hour into an eternal morning. And so the spyglass really aided in his writerly passion. And you can see both sides of that reconciled in the works he put out. And so he was influenced by the trending bird watchers of the day, including Alexander Wilson and also John James Audubon. And he visited the Boston Athenaeum to see Audubon's Prince, The Birds of America, which was very popular. And he was also influenced by his written descriptions of birds. And he would write that, he would read natural histories in the wintertime so that in the summer he could go out and find all these birds. And Audubon, with this print of the gannet here we have as an example, this is the type of bird that Thoreau would have seen on his trips to Cape Cod, for instance. And so you can really see that Thoreau was part of this thriving and artistic community of bird lovers in the early 19th century. And we're very lucky to have this spyglass here with us that can help to tell that story and many others like it. Thank you.